You jinxed me. You told me they want me back every year. This will probably be the worst year. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Amen. It has been my honor and privilege to speak to this auspicious group for 3 years in a row. If you have been to either one or both of those previous presentations, please raise your hands and now keep them up. Now what this tells me is right now that everybody with their hand raised is saying in your minds, oh my gosh, did she become a preacher over the last year? Is she about to go all religious on us? Well, the answer to the first question is kind of, sort of. I actually am ordained to the Universal Life Church for the purpose of performing weddings, and they are indeed legal. The answer to the second question is no, I'm not about to go all religious on you. I like to begin a lot of my speeches with a song. Why? Because it catches my audience attention. Not that I can sing, I don't really care about that. It's getting you caught in my net so you listen to me for at least the first few seconds of my presentation. I chose that particular song, sang to that particular tune for a reason. Good meets bad. Amazing Grace, a beloved religious song, sang to the tune of the House of the Rising Sun, a song about a house of ill repute. So as I sang that song, good met bad. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about when good meets bad. Primarily focused on the need to forgive. What happens when good meets bad and we need to forgive? Are we always able to forgive? No, we're not. I know that you are healthcare providers. And what that tells me about you is that you are servants. And by that I mean you have servant hearts. You are fixers. You want to go out there and you want to make other people feel good and you want to fix their problems. And sometimes you focus so much on other people's problems that you don't focus on yourselves. Let's face it, you work all day long. Am I right? How many leave work and go home and take care of spouses or children? Or in today's society, we're raising our grandchildren. Or maybe we're taking care of elderly parents. You do that. And sometimes you lose the need to take care of yourselves. The size of this room, I'm willing to bet money that at least one person in this room is struggling to forgive something. The size of this room, there's probably more than one person who's struggling to forgive. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe everybody in here is living the perfect life, and nobody ever does you wrong. Has anybody ever done you wrong? Oh, come on, ladies, let me hear it. Yeah. You know they have. And sometimes it's hard for us to forgive, whether it's a little bitty tiny thing or a great big important thing. sometimes it's hard to forgive. What I'm going to tell you about today is my journey to forgiveness. Now, my journey was a really long journey. I'm not going to tell you about all 18 years, but I'm going to tell you about the journey I faced and how I learned to forgive in that journey. I want to preface this by telling you that this is going to be a deeply personal story. And I never know when I tell this story whether I'm going to get emotional or not. So if I start to get a little bit emotional, just bear with me. I will pull out of that. She became a statistic on September the 25th, 1996. Her bruised and battered body, the victim of a horrible crime, was found in her smoke-filled apartment. She had been bludgeoned, raped, and strangled. The fire had been set to destroy any possible DNA that might lead to the conviction of her murderer. And with that night, her family plummeted into a hellish nightmare. We're going to talk for a few minutes about the murder of my sister. But before we can talk about that, you have to know who she was, because my sister was the good in this story. Vicki Garner was born on June the 16th, 1958. She was born on a Monday. Monday's child is fair of face. Vicki was a beautiful baby girl. Blonde hair, blue eyes, loving soul. Vicki was also one of God's special children. She was diagnosed as mildly mentally retarded when she was a child. Now, I'm going to get on my soapbox for just a quick minute about the word retarded. You know, society today has made that a very ugly word. I hear things all the time. Oh, he's so retarded. And I cringe every time I hear it. The word itself is not a bad word. It's the connotation that society has given it. Kind of like all those four-letter words. We know four-letter words, right? And all those four-letter words have true meanings. And there's absolutely, positively nothing wrong with their meanings. But we as society have turned them into bad words. As I reflect on Vicki's life, I think that it's us normal people who are actually retarded, not God's special children. Vicki was extremely loving. She was compassionate, and she loved life. Vicki was colorblind. Anybody in here colorblind? Okay. Vicki was not colorblind by the true sense of the word. She could see all of her colors, red, green, yellow, blue. Vicki was colorblind when it came to the color of your skin. You see, Vicki didn't pay any attention to whether you were Caucasian, African American, Hispanic, Native American. None of that meant anything to Vicki. Vicki judged you based on the person that you were and how you treated her. In Vicki's life, there was good and there was bad. And it was that simple. When Michael and I first met and things started to get a little serious, Vicki was going to come home from Tyler, and he was really worried about meeting her. And he kept saying to me, what if she doesn't like me? Well, what he didn't understand was it was automatic that not only was she going to like him, she was going to love him. You know why? Because I loved him. And if I loved him, that meant he was okay. For Vicki, it was that simple. Vicki was loyal. She was loyal to family. She was loyal to friends. She was loyal to Elvis Presley. And she was loyal to the Dallas Cowboys. Vicki had probably seen every single Elvis Presley movie at least 20 times. In 1986, we made a trip to Graceland, and it was her dream come true. Now, her boys, Vicki never gave up on the Dallas Cowboys. During the good, the bad, the ugly, it didn't matter. All those years, whenever When the Cowboys are losing them, we're disgusted with them and hate the fact that they're a Texas team. But not Vicki. She loved her boys. Vicki would be watching the football game, sitting on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands. It can be the last 2 minutes of the final quarter. The score is 42-20, Cowboys behind. Everybody else has walked away from the television. The stinking game is over, and we normal people know it, but not Vicki. She sat there cheering them on, believing in her Cowboys. And when the game was over, she would stand up, face the TV as if she were in the locker room, and she would say, "That's okay, boys. You'll do better next week." She was loyal. In Vicki's life, it was that simple. And then came the night of September the 25th, 1996, when good met bad and bad prevailed. To understand how bad it was, you have to know a little bit about Vicki's murderer. Robert Charles Ladd was a convicted murderer. Robert Charles Ladd was a sociopath. He began his criminal career as a juvenile. Of course, you know, a juvenile's record is sealed. All we know from that record is at least one arson is attributed to his juvenile record. In 1978, in Dallas, Texas, Robert Charles Ladd raped and murdered 20-year-old Vivian Thompson. In the course of that murder, he put Miss Thompson in the closet, put the bedclothes in between her legs, and lit them on fire. When the fire department entered her apartment, in the closet with her was her infant son, Maurice. Now, I want you to close your eyes for just a minute, and I want you to think about the words I'm about to tell you. I don't know how long it took for smoke to overcome that baby's body. He died of smoke inhalation. But what I do know is however short or however long, that little baby was terrified. But that's not the end. They found Miss Thompson's infant daughter under the crib. She also died of smoke inhalation. Dallas County offered Mr. Ladd a plea bargain. He accepted it. He got 40 years each for the murders. So let's add that up. 40 and 40 is 80, and 40 is 120. He got 20 years for the arson. So now we're up to 140. And he stole from Miss Thompson. He got 10 years for the theft. So if you've been keeping up with me, how many years do we have?
150.
150 years. Mr. Ladd entered prison in 1980. In October of 1992, 12 and a half years later, he was released on mandatory supervision to Tyler, Texas. October of 1992. He spent 12 and a half years in prison for the murders of 3 people. 4 years later, in 1996, Mr. Ladd somehow entered the apartment of Vicki Ann Garner. She was bludgeoned with a hammer. Her hands were tied with the cord from her vacuum cleaner. Her legs were tied with the cord from her curtains. Her body was dragged into her bedroom where she was raped and then strangled. Throughout the night, Mr. Ladd came and left, stealing anything of value in her home. Now, when I say anything of value, she didn't have anything of value. The only thing she had of value was a little TV set with a built-in VCR. But Mr. Ladd stole the 2-liter Dr. Pepper bottle out of her refrigerator. Mr. Ladd stole the package of fish sticks out of her freezer. Mr. Ladd stole anything that he could take out on the street and sell for $1 so he could buy crack cocaine. He did this all night long. And then somewhere between the hours of 5:30 and 6 o'clock in the morning, he put the bedclothes between her legs, he lit them on fire, and he left. Now, fortunately, her neighbors smelled the smoke. The fire department arrived, and they arrived early enough that although the body was burned and we had a closed casket service, they were able to retrieve the DNA that did indeed lead to the conviction of Robert Charles Ladd. He was tried in August of 1997, 1 year later, and he was found guilty of capital murder, and he received the death penalty. I have to tell you about my parents. At my sister's funeral, the funeral home was full, standing room only. There were people standing in the vestibule. There were people sitting in other viewing rooms listening to the service through stereo speakers. And during my sister's funeral, my father stood up in front of the crowd as I'm facing you, and he said, "You know, we all know where Vicky's gone. We all know that Vicky is now walking the streets of gold in heaven, and in heaven she's perfect. So the important thing here now is for every one of you to pray for the soul of Robert Charles Ladd." Now that's not an amazing man. I don't know who is. Somewhere in the first 2 years after their daughter's funeral, my parents chose to forgive Mr. Ladd. My mother came to my dad and she said, "I have to forgive him. I can't live with hate in my heart." So my daddy said, "You know, Lamonte, you're right. God would want us to forgive him." So my parents wrote Mr. Ladd a letter and they forgave him. My dad even offered to have a preacher come to the prison and study with Mr. Ladd. Mr. Ladd got my parents back. He was a very manipulative man. He never came out and admitted to the murder, but he told them he was sorry. So my parents were far, far better people than I. Because you see, I allowed hate and anger to fuel me for 18 years. For 18 years, my goal was to get Robert Charles Ladd to the execution chamber and to be there and watch it. It was a long road. In 2011, my mother died. She died from the effects on her body of Alzheimer's. My sister and I are firmly convinced that Alzheimer's was my mother's way of sinking into that deep abyss that would allow her to forget what happened to her child. That was the only way my mother could deal with it. Even though she had chosen to forgive him, the thought of the last few moments of her daughter's life was more than my mother could bear. And after my mother passed away, I said, "My God, this man murdered Vicky in 1996. It is 2011. The last appeal hearing was in 2006. We have been waiting for 5 years for a judge to rule on that appeal." So I called the Attorney General's office, and I got a phenomenal attorney. And I talked to her, and I said to her, "What is right about this? My sister got at the most a few minutes to beg for her life. Why is this man getting so many years?" Thus began my 3-year battle, and I fought hard during that 3 years. And my husband and my family can tell you that I became another person during those 3 years. Oh, I was strong. I was strong on the outside. I was carrying a banner. But on the inside, I was filled with so much hate and anger. We move forward to 2014. We finally have an execution date. And I request victim-offender mediation. Is anybody familiar with victim-offender mediation? The state of Texas offers this program, and the purpose of this program is to allow a victim to sit down across from the offender and pretty much say, "Why? Why did you do it? What was your purpose?" So I requested victim-offender mediation. I requested it about 3 months before Mr. Ladd was due to be executed. And they jumped into high gear. They told me it normally takes 6 months to get the program going, but they were going to try. And so I said to myself, I'm going to sit down across from this man. I'm going to ask this man some questions. I'm going to look him in the eyes, and I'm going to make him answer me. All the while thinking, and I'm going to forgive, because I need to forgive. Well, then they brought Mr. Ladd to Tyler to be given his next execution date. And I had not seen him since 2002. And he was big, and he was scary. I'm not a scary kind of gal. I went home that weekend. That hearing was on a Friday. I went home that weekend, and I sat with my revolver on the table beside me. My husband left to go to the store, and I didn't go with him. And I sat there with that revolver right in my hand. And my rational self kept saying, oh, good grief. You don't have anything to worry about. No one's coming after you. But the irrational side of me was panicked. So over the course of that weekend, I said, honey, you need to rethink this. Maybe sitting down with that man is not the best thing for you. So instead, I wrote him a letter. I wrote him a 3.5-page letter, and I poured out my heart. I told him about Vicki and who she was, the kind of person she was. I told him about my mom and dad and the kind of people they were. I told him about the pain that he had caused, all because of drugs. And then, in the last 2 paragraphs, I offered forgiveness. I told him it had been a long, hard journey for me, but I offered him forgiveness. 1 week before he was executed, I got a letter back from Mr. Ladd. Now, these letters are carried by people. You don't actually get them. I got to read it. I did not get to keep it. And in that letter, he again does not admit his guilt, but he does apologize. He apologizes for the pain he caused my family, all the while trying to claim he didn't do it. Now, what's wrong with that picture? Why are you apologizing for the pain you caused a family if you didn't do anything, you don't have anything to apologize for? He was very manipulative right up to the end. Mr. Ladd took his last breath on January the 29th, 2015. He was declared dead at 7:02 p.m. I was there. 4 other family members were standing in front of a window. A victim advocate had told me, if you want to make sure he can see you, when you enter that room, you go to the front right. So I did that. Front right. Mr. Ladd, his head was right across from me. Had there not been a glass partition, I could have reached out and touched him. He never turned his head, so he didn't see me. But in his last words, he spoke to me. He spoke directly to me. He spoke to me about requesting a vengeful death and how that wasn't good for me. Right up to his last words, he was trying to manipulate me, but he didn't. I did cry. I cried as Mr. Ladd was taking his last breath. I cried for my sister. I cried for my parents. I cried for my family. I cried in some aspect for Mr. Ladd, because religious or not, whatever you think, I knew when he took his last breath, Mr. Ladd would stand before his Maker. And that's when, if he had found God and was sincere, he would be welcomed into heaven. But if he had not, well, I have my opinion on where Mr. Ladd would go. It's been almost 20 months since Mr. Ladd took his last breath, and I've had time to reflect on the situation. I realize now that even though I forgave him in that letter, I did not 100% forgive him in my heart. I did a lot of thinking about that, and I realized over the last 18 years, I've had a lot of health problems. I have struggled with diabetes. I have not been able to get my blood sugar under control. I have struggled with cholesterol. I have had months of depression. And you know what I realized? Carrying around all that anger and all that hate, what was accomplished by that? The one thing was accomplished that 18 years, Robert Ladd had control of my life. Because that's what happens when you don't forgive. When you don't forgive, you give control of your life to your transgressor. And as long as your transgressor has control of your life, you will never be free. You know, before my sister was murdered, I was a very happy person. I lived in a bubble world. I was very positive. And to this day, I'm still positive. I never really lost that. But I lost a lot of time. And I lost a lot of me during that 18 years. And so I realized how important forgiveness is. And the importance of forgiveness is not for your transgressor, it's for you. Because when you're able to forgive and let go, you're able to live again. So I say to anybody out there that might be struggling with forgiveness, or as healthcare providers, if you have a patient or a client that is struggling to forgive, find a way to open up your heart and just let it go. Forgive and let it go. Maybe it's writing a letter to your transgressor where you really spell it all out, and then you wad that letter up and you throw it away. Maybe it's taking a couple of chairs and you sit on one side and you pretend to be your transgressor, and the empty chair is you, and you, as the transgressor, ask for forgiveness. Maybe it's finding a really good friend that you can go sit down with and hoot and holler and cuss and vent and get it all out, and they won't judge you. People ask me, how were my parents able to forgive such a heinous crime? Because my mother was right. We cannot truly live with hate in our heart. So I'm going to leave you with this. No matter what the situation, anything that happened before this very moment in time is gone. You can't do anything about it. So whether you're struggling to forgive someone else or you're struggling to forgive yourself, just open your heart, forgive, and let it go. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Thank you, ladies.
Okay, I don't know what to say after that. I knew Teresa was your girl.